Hey guys, today we're going to talk about arc length. It says arc length and area of the sector, but we're just going to talk about arc length today. So let's take a look at our warm-up. The warm-up says find the circumference and area of a circle with radius of 6 centimeters. So we remember from the past couple of lessons that circumference has two formulas. It could be either 2 times pi times the radius, or circumference is pi times the diameter. Remember, 2 times the radius is the diameter. So let's find the circumference first. Well, the radius is 6 centimeters. So let's use this formula here. Circumference equals 2 times pi times your radius, which is 6. So 2 times 6 is 12, and I'm going to keep that pi. Today when we do our lesson, we're going to keep our answers in terms of pi. So from here on out on the work that we do, we are going to keep that 12 pi centimeters for our circumference. We're not going to multiply by the pi key on our calculator or by 3.14. Area is pi times radius squared. So pi times 6 squared. 6 squared is 36. Bring down the pi. Our area is 36 pi centimeters squared. So we're keeping our answers in terms of pi, so that means our pi's don't get multiplied out. That's the most accurate answer. If you multiply it by 3.14 in your calculator, that's a rounded answer. So we are going to keep our answers in terms of pi. We're going to skip the next two warm-up problems. We'll do them on the next video when we do the next section for area of a sector. So let's move down a little bit and let's take a look at arc length. So we're going to talk about arc length. These problems probably look a little bit similar to when we had to find out the degree measurements of the arc. What we're trying to find out is the length of arc KJ. So arc length is the distance from K to J. We don't want a degree measurement. So if we said maybe like the circumference was 10 feet, we would want to know how much of that is KJ. And that would be in feet, it wouldn't be in a degree measurement. So in order to figure out arc length, there's a couple of steps that we need to follow, but there's also a formula that's very important. All right, so let's talk about the formula first. The arc length formula. So in order to find arc length, we want to always use this formula. We want to do x over 360 times 2 pi r. So let's talk about where this formula is coming from. What does the x stand for? Well, x stands for your central angle. So if we look at this picture above, the 30 degrees would be our central angle. Now let's take a look at this part of our formula. 2 times pi times the radius. Well, if we look back up to our warm-up problem, we know that that's really the circumference. So this is coming from the circumference. So really we're figuring out the central angle over 360 times the circumference. But the easiest formula to use when you're doing your calculations is this. X over 360 times 2 times pi times the radius. So I would put a bubble around that to make sure that's what you're using when we go to find out the arc length. So what we're trying to figure out is the distance from K to J. All right, how many feet is it going to be from K to J? So let's first start off by finding the circumference. So circumference is 2 times pi times the radius. Circumference equals 2 times pi. Let's take a look at our picture. If we look at our picture, we notice that from K to C is our radius. So our radius is 2. So let's plug in 2 into our picture. So circumference equals 2 times 2 is 4 pi, and our units are feet. That is our answer for circumference. We want to keep it in terms of pi. I'm going to jot that down. Keep in terms of pi. All right, let's take a look at what kind of arc JK is. I highlighted that in red. What kind of arc is it? It's small, so we call that our minor arc. Now let's find the length of arc JK. Well, if they want to find the length, I want to use my arc length formula. So I'm going to jot down the formula real quick. So arc length equals x over 360 times 2 pi r. So x, remember, is our central angle. If we look on our picture here, our central angle is angle KCJ, so the central angle is 30 degrees. 30 degrees over 360, let me make that 360, times 2 times pi times our radius. Let's look at our picture. We already highlighted that in blue. Our radius is 2. So here's what I want you to pay attention to. All right. When we are multiplying a fraction times this over here on the right, if we put this over 1, it'll make it a lot easier for us. Let's keep 30. Actually, I'm going to draw an arrow over here. I'm going to continue. 30 over 360 times, now let's simplify this. 2 times 2 is 4 pi over 1. So now let's just multiply what we have on the top here. 30 times 4 is 120, but we have to keep that pi, and multiply the bottom. 360 times 1 is just 360. So we're almost done, but we have to simplify 120 over 360. So if we use our calculator or we use our brains, we can figure out that 120 over 360 reduces to 1/3 pi, and our units were feet. That is your answer for arc length. Do not give me the decimal form. Do not multiply by pi. Keep it as a fraction in its simplest form, and keep the pi symbol. Keep it in terms of pi. All right, let's take a look at the next 2 practice problems. All right, so before I start, now that we know what our formula is, I know that I'm going to need to know my central angle, and I know I'm going to need to know what my radius is. So let's take a look at what they want us to find. Find the length of our arc JK. So I'm going to highlight arc JK. You can do that with your pencil. And take a look. Do we know what the central angle is of arc JK? Yeah, it's 105. Do we know what the radius is? Here's a radius. Here's a radius. Doesn't quite give us the radius, but it does give us the diameter. So I know that my diameter is 15. So in order to figure out the radius, remember we just take half and we have 7.5. So I'll be using my radius and my central angle in my formula. So I like to write the formula, x over 360 times 2 pi r. Plug in what we know. Central angle, x is our central angle, 105 over 360 times 2 times pi, and our radius is 7.5. All right, put that over 1. 105 divided by 360 times 2 times 7.5 is 15 pi over 1. So now let's multiply. 105 times 15 is 1575 pi over 360 times 1 is 360. So now we have to look, we have our calculators, see what this simplifies to. Turns out 1575 over 360 reduces to 35 over 8 pi centimeters. That is your answer for the length of arc JK. Okay, let's take a look at number 5. Number 5 is slightly different. They want to know the length of arc JML. Well, JML is a major arc. I know that because it has 3 letters, JML. And if we trace over where JML is in our picture here, JML, I can see it's more than 180 degrees, so it's definitely a major arc. Now, if I wanted to know arc JL, I would use the 65 degrees. But I don't want to know JL. I want to know arc JML. So, remember, if this is 65, the arc that goes with it is 65 degrees. Now, how many degrees inside of a circle? 360. So if we do 360 minus 65, I get 295. So if this arc is 295 degrees, that means this angle inside of here is 295 degrees as well. So 295 degrees is not the length of my arc. That's the degree measurement. I had to do this to get this 295 inside to be able to plug that into my formula. So remember, for my formula, I need the angle measure, which we just found was 295. I also need my radius. They told us that our radius is 11. All right, so I'm going to jot down that my radius is 11, and I know I'm going to need to use that. So let's use the arc length formula. X over 360 times 2 times pi times our radius. X in this case is 295 over 360 times 2 times pi times 11. Put that over 1. 295 over 360 times 2 times 11 is 22 pi over 1. Let's multiply 295 times 22, bigger number, 6490 pi over 360. We know in the beginning, we can cancel. Look, they have zeros at the end. So to make it easier for us, we can reduce it to 649 over 360. Turns out that can't be reduced anymore. So 649 over 36 pi inches is our answer. So remember, when we're doing arc length, 2 things you need to know. You need to know your radius, and you need to know your central angle. And keep your answers in terms of pi.